you're gonna look great. But if you wanna stay in shape, well, you better hit the GymWits.
That's right, man. Tell 'em.
Welcome to the GymWits podcast. I'm Ryan George.
I'm Justin Guild, aka Chef Sonic.
And we are the GymWits. So it's been a couple weeks for both us and listeners to the GymWits. We had to skip a week due to some technical difficulties and family issues, but we're back and hopefully
we're back and
shouldn't
stronger
be any
than
delay.
ever.
Yeah, I hope so. We'll see. How are you feeling?
Not bad, not bad. You know, I got a pretty good workout in earlier today.
So you're back to getting decent exercise? Are you
definitely.
feeling physically feeling back to normal or close to it?
Getting there.
Yeah.
You know, I still have some issues with my gut, and then sometimes I get this weird rapid heartbeat, which is extraordinarily annoying and really debilitating.
Yeah.
But usually when I exercise, it actually makes me feel better, you know, as I've stated a million times.
Yeah.
So,
Speaking of heartbeats, did I tell you when I went to the doctor last time what my heart rate was?
what was it?
It was 34 beats per minute. And
What's the average?
well, normal is like 60, 70.
So it's
Way below
low.
normal. Yeah, no, typically if you're athletic, no, that's really low, especially at my age. Like I'm not like 20, but it was funny because typically most doctors, like they'll see it, they'll look at me and say, well, you're athletic, right? And like, yeah. And they're like, all right, fine.
You
it's not
should
a problem.
always answer them,
But-
no, I'm not.
But
I'm just naturally like this.
but what happened this time, so I don't know if it was the physician's assistant or whatever. So she looks at my heart rate. She's like, no, that's not right. Let me do it again. I'm like, no, it's right. She's like, no, it's not right. I'm like, no. Anytime I've got my heart rate, it's always under 30 or 40. 34 is a little low, but it's usually under. She's like, no, you're wrong. And so she puts the thing back on. She starts taking. Now it starts off at 55, and she gives me this look like, see, I was right. But then it goes like 53, 51, 48. And then right back down to 34. I was like, see, told you. So anyway, she's a little surprised, but whatever. But then the doctor comes in and he's like, I've never had a doctor do this, but he like scared me. He's like, you got to go to a cardiologist like now. I'm like, but it's been like this ever since I was like, I can remember. He's like, no, you need to go to a cardiologist. Just make sure it's okay, blah, blah, blah. So kind of scared me. And I've had, I have a bit of a family history of early heart attacks at a young age so kind of one of those things like, you know what, maybe I should go get my heart checked out. But
Check it out. But isn't having a low heart rate?
Well, I mean, there are limits to that. Like most
Sure.
people are going to tell you 34 is pretty low. The only thing is
What
that
about your blood pressure?
I mean, my blood
That must
pressure is
be
normal.
normal, but
Yeah,
your
and the
heart
other thing
rate
is like
is
I have a
low.
friend who's a doctor, and we were talking about it. And he's like, you know, I don't have any other symptoms relating to heart disease. I don't have any other issues. Like my heart rate doesn't come with like dizziness or shortness of breath with mild exertion or anything that you might lead you to be concerned, and it goes up normally when I exercise. So it's most likely normal, but I'm at an age, and again with the family history, where it's probably worth getting it checked out just to be on the safe side.
Yeah. Maybe that explains why you were so shy over the years. Maybe that's the reason.
Why? Because I don't have heart.
Yeah, that's it. Like maybe if your heartbeat was like a little faster, you would have been having a completely different personality. How funny would that be if like they give you some medication to speed up your heart and you just like turn into a different person?
It sounds like a bad comedy, like a plot to a bad comedy. All right. Anyway, so on to today. So we have an interesting study. So we both praise, I guess I'm not thinking the right word right now, but high intensity interval training is my favorite way to work out.
We worship at the altar.
Yes, we worship at the altar of high intensity training. However, as I know, or I kind of can intuit that it's not for most people. So this study is in the Journal of Psychology of Sports and Exercise. And basically the idea is that, high intensity interval training won't work for most people. And so I'll give you a quote from one of the researchers, Patty Elkakakis, I think.
Okay.
And it's, if you can take an hour of exercise and squeeze it into 1 minute, there's a price to pay. The price is 100% intensity. And so I think that's an important thing to consider for anybody who's like thinking about doing high intensity interval training. We all talk about it and how great it is, and it's like a magic pill. And in some ways it could be a magic pill, but there is that cost, and that cost is the intensity has to be ramped up significantly. So, and on the surface, it seems like high intensity interval training, which we will do a podcast on, because I know we talk about it a lot, but we never really did a kind of dive into it. But it seems great because most people, the main obstacle for many people is time. I think for most of us, it's not really time. I think time is the excuse we use, but the but it eliminates the time issue, because if you can do that, maybe not a minute, but if you 5-10 minutes, if you can get the same amount as an hour, then great. But the intensity is a problem. And so the reason, or part of what I'll give you the study. So basically the study measured pleasure and enjoyment during and following exercise. Now, the key here, though, is that the participants were obese and inactive. So they specifically were seeking that kind of population out. And they basically had them do two kinds of workouts. One was a normal workout, and the other was like high intensity interval training. And the key here was that they burned the same amount of calories. So what they found is that the participants found much greater pleasure and joy and enjoyment with the moderate normal exercise than with the high intensity interval training. And the reason for this is likely that, we want exercise to be a part of our lifestyle. And so by doing something that's that intense and that difficult, if you're not used to it and if you don't enjoy it, it's stressful. And even the anticipation of it is stressful. And so even though you might be saving time, the enjoyment you'll get out of it is much less. And then theoretically, you'll still fall into this. You'll find another excuse. If it's not time, it'll be family, it'll be this, it'll be that, it'll be injuries, it'll be pain. So, and that's the other problem, is that when sustaining a program like that, there's a higher risk of injury. So the idea is you want to find something that, which we preach, is find something that will be adaptable to your lifestyle. So high intensity interval training is great if you like exercise, if you're into it, and if you're at that level, but it really isn't the be all to end all. And you should be careful if it's kind of sold to you as that.
Yeah. Very early on, we did an episode on discomfort and how most people will avoid discomfort in all facets of their life, whether it will be altercations at the office, whether it will be having to do rigorous exercise, whether it has to be avoiding foods that give them pleasure. And this falls right into that, that it doesn't feel good. As really intense exercise for most people will never be pleasurable, right? Just like certain sports that really push you hard will never be pleasurable, right? So it doesn't feel good to be completely out of breath, to be completely exhausted, right? Some people like it for this. I don't want to say it's masochistic, but there almost is an element of it that you have to enjoy feeling discomfort, right? And I think to really work out hard in whether you're into weights or distance running, there is an element of that. But I think with high intensity interval training, it really comes to the forefront. It instantaneously does not feel good, right? You're 10 seconds in, you're like, oh man, why am I doing this? Yeah. So it makes sense that it would not be for most people. Yeah. And of course, the sort of marketing aspect has played into this as well, into how big it's gotten, and people are training like athletes. Yeah. Right? Training like athletes has become very trendy, and that's how a lot of athletes train. Right, depending on what sport you play, not all, but lots of sports, basketball, football, function in these short bursts. Yeah. Right. So it doesn't make sense. Well, it might to maybe run long distances because that's not what they're training for. They're training for burst. Right. So that's why a lot of athletes will train in that way, or at least for some of their training regimen. And I think that sort of moved over to the gym world and marketing world when it comes to that. So it makes sense. It's not for everyone, and just so that people know, there are more than one ways to do interval training. There doesn't necessarily have to be high intensity interval training. There's different levels of interval training too that but we want to focus on that because that's what, again, I preach. And it's great for sure. Just saying that there's, as you've said, there's many different training modalities and there's many different reasons to train and ways to train. So and if you're assuming you're not a professional athlete or a fitness model or whatever it is, certainly finding something that works for you that you can do consistently is almost always going to be the most important. Yeah.
So today's topic comes from John. So it's actually kind of an Ask the Trainer. Now, I got this question a while back.
And a lot of people have asked about this over the years.
But this is it was a really interesting topic, and I wanted to make sure to do kind of justice to it. So I'll let you read the question, and then we'll get into the topic.
Okay. Comes from John, and John asks, I would like to request an in-depth discussion on the forearms and hands. As a pianist, I have some basic understanding of this most fascinating part of our anatomy, but don't know much on how to train them, i.e. daily exercises, injury imbalances, isometric training, etc. In the past 12 months, I had taken up powerlifting with an excellent coach. However, I felt frustrated by, in parentheses, what I perceive, the fitness industry's lack of attention on forearm strength and conditioning. Many thanks for your time put into recording the shows. Really appreciate it and enjoy listening to them. Best regards, John. Well, thank you, John, for writing in. And certainly we're going to do our best to talk about the forearms.
Yeah. So John's right. There does seem to be a lack of attention paid to the forearms when it comes to fitness and exercise. I think some of it makes sense and some doesn't, and I think it's an area that would be, even if it's not important to train, it's useful to know why it's not important to train. So it's definitely a great topic to talk about. And like I said, I did want to do it kind of justice. I think the first thing to think about when it comes to the hands and forearms is that it's essential to being a human.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's part of why I think why we developed. It's used in almost any movement with the upper body. So the hands and forearms are one of those areas where it's always used. So the key then is do we need to pay extra attention to it because it's always being used, or do we not need to pay attention to it again because it's always used?
And John, just so that if you don't know already, I'm in the same boat as you. I'm a musician. I'm a guitar player. So there's lots of stress that's put on my forearms and hands. In fact, it's almost all forearms and hands. So I certainly I speak your language with that. And I've actually found that over the years, probably exercising I think has helped me actually play my instrument. In terms of if I had to play for long periods of time, of course, just like with sport-specific training, if you want to get good at a sport, you train that sport. Same thing, working out is not going to make you better at your instrument, but it can aid in certain things. I found that if I've had to practice for hours on end, perhaps I have a little bit more stamina. I don't get as fatigued as quickly. So, yeah, we have a few topics that we're going to cover that we hope will discuss the forearms adequately. I guess the first question is simply, what is the function of the forearms?
Okay, so the forearms and hands work together. So you're really not going to get movements that don't combine the two. So we kind of think of them as when I think of it, a lot of it, especially when it comes to exercise, it's one kind of unit. Or they function as a unit. And so you want to think about grip, obviously, is incredibly important. But then you have things like fine motor activities. So when it comes to playing the piano or guitar, those are going to be really important when it comes to, handling a drawing or writing. Anything that requires fine motor skills with the hands are also going to be using the forearms. The other thing is it's a link in the chain. So it's in the upper body, in the chain of upper body movements, the hands and the forearms are always going to be almost always going to be a link in that chain. So unless like you're throwing like an elbow strike in a martial art or something, like the wrists and forearms are connected to almost every activity. So it's ubiquitous. It's part of everything you're doing, especially when it comes to the upper body.
So now, how much do the forearms and I guess now your grip strength help with other exercises, compound exercises?
Well, yeah. So the forearms kind of exist in a weird middle ground because, like I said earlier, they are involved in everything. So on one hand, you'd think, well, do I need to train it additionally because it's involved with everything, so it's always working? But since it's essential and involved in everything, maybe I need to work it more because that will help. If my forearms are stronger, then it will help with other activities. So I think in general, my personal philosophy and what I've read, I think it to an extent becomes a little bit specific to the tasks you're looking for. and the type of training. So I think we can talk a little bit about, kind of maybe specific tasks or specific needs, but there's no real clear-cut answer. But I tend to think that there are, since it is involved in everything, if there's not a weakness, then it's not something you need to pay extra attention to.
Well, I know that an issue that I've had, and this will segue to our next topic, which is grip strength, that I've done deadlifts before where I felt like I could do more deadlifts, but my grip strength just gave out.
Yeah.
So clearly, if you can't hold the bar, then you can't complete the exercise. So it's almost it's a nuisance in a way. And you're like thinking, well, the grip strength isn't important. I'm doing it for my full body, but it is important in a way, because if you can't hold it, then you can't do the exercise.
Yeah. Well, okay. So grip strength is really interesting. So there are a couple things with grip strength. One is it's actually a really good measure of overall strength, mortality. And especially in older adults, your overall muscle mass is directly correlated with forearm muscle thickness, right? So grip strength is actually a really important tool. Now, you wonder, is it because of the grip strength, or is it just that, well, yeah, if you're older and you're in good shape, you're going to have better grip strength. So who knows? But grip strength is a way to test.
All those. The firmest handshakes always come from like those old dudes.
Yeah, right. The old man strength. So grip strength is definitely typically kind of correlated with better outcomes. So now, again, grip is necessary for like everyday tasks. So things like opening a jar, carrying groceries. There are a number of things where having good grip is going to be important. But then, so now if you find that you're having trouble opening jars, then maybe grip strength is important. If you find that but now let's think about this. So let's say 2 everyday tasks I mentioned, carrying groceries. If you're having trouble carrying groceries, that's maybe more endurance than strength. So maybe the endurance needs to be worked more, versus if you can't open the jar, that might be more strength.
There was a very funny sort of little scene that took place. I was watching a baseball game, and they shot to a fan in the audience, in the crowd, that was trying to open a bottle of water, and this guy was real muscle bound, and he kept struggling, and he could not open the bottle of water. It was just stuck, and he wound up having to give it to someone else who opened it. And one of the announcers said, "Man, you've got the wrong workout regimen going."
Well, yeah, so that's pretty good. But yeah, so I mean, so grip strength is really important. But then in your task, let's say if you want to deadlift better and you find that you have a weakness with the grip, then that may be something that specifically you need to train a little bit more. So again, that's the issue is where are you finding the weakness and so in that case, like doing a deadlift, there are many links in that chain, from the legs, from the quads to the hamstrings to the glutes to the lower back to the upper body, to your forearms. And if you're finding that everything else is okay, but you're not gripping, then obviously the grip becomes the weakest link in that chain, and that's something that needs to be fixed. But that's more beyond what's necessary for the average person, but that's something to consider. Now, one other thing before we talk about kind of the next thing we had on our kind of list is there are other things that people don't consider. So we're thinking about the strength and endurance of the grip, right? We're talking about that, but another important thing is mobility. And that's something that we don't always consider. So like, we tend to flex the wrist more than we extend the wrist. And we don't like laterally flex the wrist too much, or rotating one way versus rotating the other. Like try just hold your arm in place and rotate one way and rotate the other without your elbow kind of compensating. And some people have a hard time doing that. So, the mobility of the wrist, the mobility of the hands, being able to touch the fingers, but also being able to extend the fingers. Those are all things that are really important that for a lot of people, they may struggle to do that. So while, like in general, where strength is really important and endurance is important, mobility is also going to be, just as important as everything else for specific, for certain activities.
Well, I think that also segues right to the next topic, which are, what about some of the injuries that are associated with forearm, especially the hand? Oh, man.
Yeah. I mean, there are some common injuries. Yeah. So one of the bigger causes for injuries is that there is an imbalance between the elbow flexors, so like the biceps muscle and all the muscles around there, the brachialis muscle and brachioradialis and deeper muscles, and the triceps, which extend. So there's an imbalance between the kind of flexors and extenders of the elbow, and then the wrist flexors. So when you have an imbalance there, that could potentially lead to an injury. So now another example, deadlifts are one, but let's say a basic bicep curl as another example. So you may have very powerful, strong biceps muscles, and so those muscles will help you curl the bar. But if the wrist and forearm muscles aren't strong and the hand and the grip strength isn't there, then there's an imbalance. So your elbow flexors may be able to hang on to a lot of weight, but then the wrist flexors and the grip and kind of just isometrically holding the bar, if those muscles aren't able to do their job, then there's an imbalance there, and you can actually injure yourself, because while the biceps have no problem handling the weight, your forearm does have a problem and the hand does have a problem, and so there's an imbalance there. So we see some things like tennis elbow is an injury that happens fairly often. Golfer's elbow, which is kind of on the other side of the elbow. So they often get kind of mistaken for each other, but they, due to insufficient strength, those are common injuries. You have things like carpal tunnel syndrome, which happens a lot with like overuse for computers or on piano, tendinitis, bursitis, myofascial pain syndrome. So there's
about tendinitis. I was diagnosed with tendinitis when I went into a doctor once because I was having pain. I actually think it was from an injury that I sustained during a jiu-jitsu class where someone bent my wrist. I think that's what it was from. Yeah. Maybe not, or maybe that in a combination of lifting weights and playing guitar and whatnot. Basically, tendinitis in some regards, but the doctor told me this. Basically, we can't diagnose anything. You have pain in your hand, your muscles feel tight, you have tendinitis, right? Yeah. It's sort of one of those afflictions that there's no real answer to. Yeah. Now, I don't know if this is every case of that, but that was coming straight from a doctor.
You'll hear that a lot. That's a common answer, and usually is some kind of inflammation with the connecting tissue, and that's an easy way to just put some ice on it. Take some, whatever we give you, and you'll be fine in weeks or months or years. But yeah, that's a common answer. But that's a problem with if you for you. Well, let's say that happened. That was kind of an acute injury. But you'll have some, if you play piano, or if you play guitar, if you do something repetitively and you don't compensate with movements to kind of correct the overuse. So you're overusing your muscles in a certain way. And if you don't do exercises and stretches to correct that, then the imbalances occur and overuse injuries then occur. So it's really important that if you are doing an activity that is repetitive and constant and kind of in one motion and one range of motion or one movement, then you have to compensate by stretching and strengthening the opposing muscles so that there's some kind of balance. And that way, if there's balance, you're less likely to injure yourself.
Well, I think that the next and most obvious question is, well, what are some of the ways to train the forearms? Now, we all know that bicep curls do work the forearms.
One of them. Yeah. I mean, just anything really is going to. So there are a couple schools of thought. So it depends. It also depends what you're doing. If you're bodybuilding, you're going to have a different idea of what to do for your forearms than if you're doing it for jiu-jitsu or if you're doing it for playing the piano. But there are different schools of thought. So you have some, again, that never train it. So you have Dorian Yates, who has 19-inch forearms, one of the great bodybuilders of our time, and he says he never trains his forearms. That could just be genetics,
except when he would put needles in them. I love Dorian Yates, but let's be real here.
Yeah. Then there are other people. Well, yeah, I don't think he would deny it. There are other people who see the forearms as being really important, and they have to. You have to train your forearms. You have to do like wrist curls and extensions and
See this guy at the gym. What he would do is he would have this bar with a string attached to it.
Yeah, and roll it
to a weight.
Yeah,
and then he would sort of roll it.
Yeah. So I mean, so that's the thing. I think with the forearms, it really depends on the function of the individual.
You also have that thing, right? With
the grip,
the gripper.
Yeah, the grip thing. Yep. So I mean, I'll use myself as kind of an anecdote. Like I have fairly big forearms for cosmetics, like for weightlifting or bodybuilding, and I've never trained my forearms. But so right there, it's like, okay, well, I fit into the kind of Dorian Yates category. Not that I'm 19-inch forearms, but that kind of aesthetically, my forearms match the rest of my physique, so I've never had to train them extra. But when I started doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, all of a sudden my grip strength was important, and I didn't have it. And so then I needed to do specific things to work on my grip, because now where my grip was fine, my forearms and grip and strength and everything was fine for previous me, new me trying Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was struggling because I didn't have the grip strength to hang. So again, that's a situation where it becomes specific. So, I think
in fact, in Jiu-Jitsu and Judo, which I did, grip strength is very important. Just for people that might not know, those two sports revolve around gripping a gi, like the karate jacket. And you do techniques by manipulating the gi. There's a lot of pulling on it and pushing, and if you can't hold on to it, you're going to have a problem with it. Yeah. And sometimes there's like techniques around breaking the grip too. So if you have a strong grip, it really comes in handy.
Yeah.
You totally missed my pun there. All right. So what are some things to consider before training the forearms?
So I think everyone can benefit from forearm training. That's pretty straightforward. You can benefit from it. The problem is it worth your
top eye?
Yes. the problem is it worth your time? So that's the question you have to ask yourself. Is it worth the time? So if you don't have any issues, if you're not bodybuilding, you need 19-inch forearms. If you're not noticing a weakness when it comes to grip strength, if you don't play an instrument, if you're relatively balanced, then it might make more sense to just do other exercises that you're going to train your forearms anyway. So I think that's an important thing to consider, right off the bat, is that. Now, the second part. So while strength is important for anything, again, if you feel like you're not lacking in strength, I don't think heavy weights are absolutely necessary for doing forearm training. I think that the endurance is more important. The forearms, there are a lot of small muscles and tendons, and it's really easy to strain the muscles in the forearms. So doing heavy weights can be counterproductive. And so I think that if you're not noticing a weakness or an imbalance, it's better to kind of focus on things that would work the endurance and mobility rather than kind of focusing on strength. Now, again, like I said, if you're bodybuilding or if you're weightlifting and you're finding that that's an area that needs work, I'm all for strength training. But if it's not an identifiable weakness, I think endurance training is more important. And then, like I said, tie it into your regular exercises. Almost any upper body exercise you do is going to require the forearms. So as long as you're really thinking about your grip while you're doing the exercise, that should be enough.
Right. So now, what are some sports where forearm and grip strength are important? I know we mentioned the gi sports, judo, jiu-jitsu, sambo, stuff like that. Yeah. I can think of another one, arm wrestling.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, almost every sport has some use, right? But like judo and Brazilian jiu-jitsu, grip is incredibly important. Yeah. Baseball grip is incredibly important. Tennis, golf, football, if you're throwing the football, especially, weightlifting, climbing, those are all really important. When you come to baseball, pitchers who pronate faster. So when if you have your palm neutral and you turn your wrist up, that's supinating, and turning it down is pronating. So the pitchers who can pronate faster had better results. So there's some correlation between pronation and the speed of the pitch. Forearm. Now this is where endurance is important. So forearm oxidative capacity is a predictor of climbing performance. So that means that really to make a complicated thing sound a little bit easier, just the endurance, the muscle endurance you have in your forearms is going to make a difference if you're rock climbing. So again, that's a situation where it's sport specific, right? So if you're a pitcher, you might be working on exercises that really work pronation, where if you're a rock climber, endurance becomes really important. Bodybuilders, volume's more important. So if you're a bodybuilder, which again is another sport that requires forearms, the volume of work is more important than necessarily doing heavy weights.
And similarly, a sport like strongman, I can imagine the forearms and the grip strength being very important. You have to lift and hold something for a long time. I'm sure that people probably have failed on those exercises just on grip strength alone.
Yeah. Yep. So now, there are a couple things. So I guess now we can get a little bit more specifically to John, because he's a unique case, because he's kind of doing two things. So, the first thing I would consider is that there is a bit of a conflict between, playing the piano and weightlifting. I think they're things you can do together, but they present different challenges as far as how you would want to train the forearms. So if you're a pianist, again, like we talked about, mobility is really important. The muscle endurance is important, but it's not really strength endurance. It's just the endurance to be able to do those movements, for an extended period of time. Again, range of motion and flexibility in the fingers, in the hand, the wrist are all really important. And also doing exercises that kind of extend the fingers and extend the wrist are also going to be really important. So, really becomes a situation of balance and mobility for the piano. But when it comes to the weightlifting, it then is more of, heavier weights and grip strength and strength endurance. So you have like your regular endurance, which is, just being able to do the activities for an extended period of time. But then strength endurance is, doing that with some level of resistance. So so that's a little bit counter to the piano. So, it's doable. But what I would say is that if you decide that you want to compete as a power lifter or weightlifting, and that becomes your priority, the piano may suffer slightly because it's just you're doing something physiologically that's a little bit counter to what playing the piano, and they can be done together. It's just you have to be aware of it, and be aware of the pain. And there was a couple things I'd found. So there was a study. This is just again specific to John or any pianist or any musician really. So there's a study of pianists that reported that 63% have pain or deal with reported pain associated with playing the piano, and most seek out a piano coach to identify the problem and try to correct it. But what's really important is to go seek out real pain management. So if you have an issue, it's really important that you actually go seek out a physical therapist or somebody who can really help you with the pain, and not just go to your coach. And I know this from experience. I've had people who come to me as a trainer with medical issues, and it's like, well, we talk about it all the time. There are certain things that are beyond my scope, so you shouldn't come to me for medical advice, really, because I'm not the expert. So same thing with a pianist. If you're experiencing pain, don't ask your coach. As knowledgeable as your coach might be, you want to go to a specialist who can really help you with that pain. And it's just that's one. What I'd say is just really be careful, because if your bread and butter is the piano, and bread and butter is your wrist and forearms, you don't want to injure that with the weightlifting unless like that takes priority. And just be aware of it and be aware of any pain that you're experiencing, and make adjustments make whatever adjustments are necessary so that you can continue to enjoy the weightlifting and continue to enjoy playing the piano.
Yeah, so, all right, I think that covers forearms fairly substantially.
Guess so. I think, I'm sure I missed something. If I did, send us an email. Email us at thegymwits@gmail.com. We're gonna cheat.
There's one thing I'm going to ask. I forgot. Yeah. What about wrist curls? I've heard a lot of people say that they're dangerous.
No.
Is it just a sort of like overdoing it?
Yeah, and that's another thing. We'll
Is
add
the wrist a muscle.
So we're gonna add an extra, like a PDF with some good exercises for the wrist. I had a whole list, but I'm not gonna explain these all of them. It would take all day. So we'll add a little list with some different exercises that you can try out. There's some good websites out there anyway that have some good wrist and forearm things. But really, it's what was your question?
Basically, is it safe to do? And
okay.
Is there
so,
muscle in the wrist, or is it?
The wrist is a joint. The wrist is a joint,
yeah.
And so there are muscles that attach to to move that in whatever range, whether it's flexing, extending, inversion, eversion. Then you have the radius and the ulna. So there are two muscles. There are two bones there attached between the elbow and the wrist joint, and one turns over the other. So a lot of movements going on, in that area. So wrist curls are fine, but I wouldn't do it with super heavy weight, because, like I said, again, there is a lot going on. So any one injury, and it could affect you for a long time.
Sure.
So you want to be careful with that. At the same time, again, it is linked to everything. So if you hurt it, it's linked to everything, and then you're screwed. There are a lot of things you can't do.
During the time when I had a injured wrist, It was really, really hard to work out.
It's debilitating in some ways. It's weird, like how
you
you just lose out on a lot of activities.
Sure.
So yeah, so I will add there'll be a PDF added. I'll put this on the website too because we always add it with the app, and we had one of the Ask the Trainers was somebody asking for us to include it elsewhere since they didn't have an iPhone. So we're gonna try to include that on the website as well. And that is it. If you have any questions, I was gonna say I'm cheating. Today, we're not doing an Ask the Trainer because this, even though this is a topic, it was an Ask the Trainer. The whole episode was an Ask the Trainer, so we'll get back to that next week. We do have a couple to go through. So check us out, thegymwits.com. All of our stuff is there, social media, email, submit questions, submit to interview us or for us to interview you. It is all there. So once again, I'm Ryan George.
I'm Justin Guild, a.k.a. Chef Sonic, reminding you that truth does not sell.
And we are the GymWits.